Hello, this is Travis Justice, and this is my tutorial mission 2 video for CS3355. This is take 2 for me as my first one ran way over time. So I am going to try to run through everything important without taking up too much time and still being as thorough as possible. So um, first off, they had us make sure we had the Unity editor properly set up. Then they went quickly into implementing the Ruby sprite here, turning her into a character and adding a script, which evolved quite a bit over time. As you can see here, this is the Ruby controller script, the finished product. As you can see, it's quite a bit longer than the default Unity script, which is 2 empty functions. So there's a lot of development that went into that, and it changed a lot over time. It was a lot of fun to watch that script grow and evolve with time. So the first thing we added for this script was the movement, and movement was done using the axes that we can see as part of the Unity editor. And by default, they're called horizontal and vertical. Basically, this input.getAxis function is just telling Unity to find the horizontal and vertical axes and correspond them to the movement of the character, and to store them in a vector2 variable called move. And then this is obviously x and y are the parameters of that function, or of the variable rather. The next thing they had me work on was tile maps, and tile maps are the world you see here, not the trees, not the building here, not the enemies, but specifically the landscape itself, the water, the grass, the little patches of grass and flowers you can see here, the ground itself, the pavement, the water here, this little pond here. So this was all the result of tile maps, which was part of this lovely little tile palette they gave me. And I was able to just brush it all into the game like this. And I thought that this was a super fun part of the project. I got to let my creativity show a little bit, or lack thereof. So that was a very fun part of the project for me. And moving on was took me to decorating the world, which was putting in these boxes, the trees, as I mentioned before. The mushrooms here, they don't actually have a hitbox, they're more of a decoration. But as you can see, the next thing they showed me was to put these hitboxes on the objects where you would not want Ruby to move through. And the way they did that was with box colliders, which are here. As you can see, if I deactivate it, the green box disappears. If I reactivate it, it'll reappear. So that was the making sure Ruby didn't move through objects. The next thing they worked on was, the next thing I worked on rather was health collectibles. These little strawberries here. So you can see if I walk into spikes, or if I were to walk into one of these robots, Ruby is damaged, her health goes down. Then I can pick up the strawberry and her health gets back up to full. That'll help her regenerate health after she's gotten into a bad fight with some robots. So that was a cool little feature. That was another script that they had me make, called the health collectible script here. On trigger enter, which is a function that involves a hitbox hitting another hitbox essentially. This makes sure that it's Ruby hitting the strawberry so that the enemies cannot pick up the health. And if there is a Ruby controller object hitting the strawberry, it essentially runs Ruby's change health function with a value of 1, meaning that it runs this function down, calls this function down here, change health, with a 1 in the amount parameter, which will then increase her health by 1, staying between the range of 0 and max health. The next thing they showed me was very similar, but it was in the opposite direction, which was showing how to have Ruby take damage when she does things like hit these spikes, hit the robot here, run back up and hit these spikes again. Then she needs more health, so then she can go and pick up these strawberries. So this is essentially, it's the same exact script with the damage zone script here, or the enemy controller has some AI involved, but the damage zone is the same as the fruit. The only difference here is that it changes her health by -1, and it doesn't destroy the object when she runs into it. With these strawberries, you needed to destroy the game object so it would no longer be there after Ruby had picked it up. With these spikes, they were consistent and they stayed there once they had been hit by Ruby. And then from there was the really interesting parts of the project, but I think it got gradually more difficult from here on out, because next up was the sprite animation, which was admittedly not as involved as I imagined it being, but it was definitely, it had a lot to it, and it was kind of difficult at first. But that's how I got this cool running animation for Ruby, excuse me, and the walking animation for the robots, the dancing animation for the robots once they're fixed, and then also the throwing of the cogwheels in whatever direction Ruby's looking or facing. So, and then also when Ruby gets hit by something, she kind of does that damaged pose of being kind of knocked backward. So, and then also the zombie here blinking very quickly. That's his animation. Next up was the Cinemachine, which the Cinemachine was a cool way to kind of get the camera to follow Ruby. So before this part of the project, the camera was stationary, and then you could just have Ruby run right off the screen, and then you could quickly lose track of her. So the Cinemachine was a good way to kind of follow Ruby, constantly keep track of where she was going, and it also just makes the game look a whole lot better. Then the next portion was to add a camera confiner, which was basically a giant hitbox surrounding the whole map, which made sure that the camera could not go outside of these bounds. Because this was the problem I had at first. If I have the camera in perspective mode, this is what it looked like without the camera confiner on it. Is I could just walk and I could see this weird skybox in the background, which is not what I wanted, obviously. So having it on the orthographic view and then having this camera confiner, which is that little tiny green line you can see there. I can trigger it there and you can see it better. But that essentially makes it so that this camera will not go outside of the bounds of wherever you have that collider. Okay, so next up was the particle effects. And the particle effects are on two things in this game. And there are more things that I had intended to add, but I haven't gotten to them yet. But I plan on, now that the tutorial part of it's done, I plan on adding more and playing around with some of the scripting and stuff in this game. But the particle effects include the smoke coming off of the robots here, and also the little sparkly bits behind the strawberry there. There's also another particle effect asset that they have in this project that was built in for when a robot gets hit by a cog, or when Ruby gets hit by a robot. And it was like a pow kind of effect, for lack of a better word. It looked kind of like a metal hitting metal. If I can find it here. Not animations. Yeah, VFX. So it was this kind of a particle here that I think that would look really cool when the cog hits the robot, if it kind of made that little spark kind of a effect. But I wasn't asked to do that as part of the tutorial, so for time's sake I didn't do that part yet, but I plan to in the future. And then finally, after particles, the rest of it was pretty quick to finish up the rest of it. The last two things they showed me were, or last three things, sorry, were first how to make up the head up display that you see in the corner here, which was essentially a combination of implementing something called a canvas. And the canvas basically is an overlay for lack of a better word, over the game that so that it will follow the camera, and if anything goes behind it, it will get blocked so that the health bar doesn't get hidden behind a tree or like one of the robots or zombie or anything like that. The next thing they showed me was first implementing zombie into the game and animating them and such, but also it was a dialogue raycasting tutorial. And the raycast makes it so that that dialogue box will not appear when I'm not facing zombie. If I'm looking any other direction, it won't face him or it won't show up. If I'm looking at him and I press X, or you can bind it to any button. I bound it to X on the non-player character. Where is it? Display dialogue, timer display. So then that'll dialog box set active true. And then that will basically the update function just checks to see, okay, are you pressing the button? And then if you're not pressing the button, it will not show the dialog box. If you do press the button, it'll show the dialog box for a given amount of time, which you can specify on the zombie game object. In the script here, you can have the display time. This is in seconds. So if I wanted to display for longer, I could set it to like 6 seconds, or shorter, I could do 2 seconds, whatever. So, all right. And finally, the last thing they showed me was audio. And the audio part of this was pretty straightforward. It added the background music. It added, and I have it muted here so that it's not just playing ad nauseum. But I'm not sure if the audio will come through on Zoom or not, but there is background music playing right now. And then there's also the sound of the robots walking. There's a sound when I throw a cogwheel, and when Ruby gets hit or picks up health, there's also a sound effect there. And that was the sound part of it. That was a really fun thing to script. Basically just setting up a bunch of effects with triggers and more effects with triggers and whatnot. And then finally, the last thing to do was to build a distributable exe file to send to all my closest friends in order for them to play the game. So that about does it. I will address something real quick. I think that this tutorial ended pretty abruptly. And what I mean by that is I would have loved to have them give an ending to the game. So I can implement one on my own, I'm sure. I think I have the knowledge to do so. But if I fix all three, right now I have 3 robots in this game. If I fix all 3 robots, the game will continue going. If I damage Ruby enough to where she dies or runs out of health, again, the game keeps going. You can see she's out of health, and the game keeps going. And they didn't tell me how to end the game. I'm sure I could figure it out, but they didn't. It just kind of feels unfinished. But the amount that I learned from this tutorial was far more than I expected, and it was a lot of fun getting to do it. So with all that being said, I am looking forward to further future projects in this class, game jams and so forth. And thank you for watching.